All right, thank you for staying with the Monday Report. Let's continue that conversation we asked you earlier on. What is your concern with the judgment from the Supreme Court? At Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya, use the hashtag Monday Report. We'd like to see what you're saying on that. Reverend Tom Otieno Vika, ACK, St. Augustine's Madaraka is here with us still. And Ochiel Dudley, advocate of the High Court, is also with us. He was an amicus curiae. And Ochiel, let me bring you back on this. There's a lot of misconception on what the Supreme Court judgment was about. This was about the right to form an association, not legalizing the acts of homosexuality, right?
Yeah. I think we had 3 judgments, 5 judges, but 3 judgments, because there was a majority of 3 judges, and then there was a dissenting minority, Justice Ouko, Justice Ibrahim. And one thing that all the judges agreed on was that this is not about legalizing homosexuality in Kenya. In fact, all of them say that it's a crime. But then the issue was about the formation of that organization. And it was a dispute that had come all the way, gone to the High Court, 3 judges there, gone to the Court of Appeal, 5 judges, and then now come to the Supreme Court. So this is about the registration of that organization to agitate for rights, maybe fight for space. And that's why when I began, I'd mentioned that I think this is the church, flexing its muscles and guarding its territory. If I were in church, I would call it, agree with Bishop and call it creeping compromise. If we allow these, then what else? So, because there's another case in court that seeks to decriminalize. So the letter that Charles Kanjama signed as the chair of Kenya Christian Professional Forums makes it so clear that this is about that case at the Court of Appeal. He says, let us safeguard this, so that I think I would understand where the church is coming from. Yeah. He thinks that if you allow this, then there's more. But the Supreme Court did not. I think it's being judged unfairly. Yeah. I work for an organization called Kenya Law, and the work of Kenya Law is to post those judgments on the website so that they're available and someone can read and understand. The court also gave a media summary. Yeah. Without saying the decision is right or wrong, I think we just need to understand what the issue was about. Okay. And when we go to court, whether the judge is an elder or a pastor, when you're in court, they're just a public official. The separation of church and state. So they just decide based on the law that is before them. And the argument was, the reasons that the NGO board gave for refusing to register, were they valid? The other issue, there are just 2 issues. The other issue was, if someone refuses, the NGO board refuses to give you a name, to reserve a name, it didn't go to the registration. It was still at the reservation of name stage. Do you have an alternative forum within the NGO board before you go to court? It was a case with very narrow issues. Okay. That's why I said I think that the church is concerned about that thing called creeping compromise. It doesn't know where we go from here. Okay. But the Supreme Court answers that question. It says that this is a debate that Kenyans will have. If they want to legalize, they will have that debate, and when the time comes, they'll legalize. Okay. So that we are not there yet. Yeah, I think I needed to clarify that. All right. Yeah.
Reverend, let me bring you back on this. And today I decided to come with my constitution here because they say the law is very clear, but there's nothing clear about the law. So, Article 27, Sub-Article 4, and I'm looking at this here. It says the state shall not discriminate directly or indirectly against any person on any ground, including race, sex, pregnancy, marital status, health status, ethnic or social origin, color, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, dress, language, or birth. So how then do we bridge the gap between the letter of the law and societal sentiments and values?
Well, there's something in between there called the spirit of the law. The spirit of that law, especially with regard to the word sex, actually means gender, not sex orientation. Because that particular law, that piece of legislation, is drawn right from 1948. It is something that has just been put in our constitution since the inception of this country. So that was never changed. It was never something that was in debate and in question about the understanding of it and how it has always been applied. The reason that the church is concerned is because for the first time, we're hearing the Supreme Court tell us that that particular legislation, when it uses the word sex, instead of gender, it means sex orientation. So it's a deliberate misinterpretation by the Supreme Court to render judgment about a matter that they know how most Kenyans feel about. That is the problem. It is not the crafting of that legislation, it is the spirit of it.
Okay. But is that the issue, Dudley, when you look at it? Because you said that the Supreme Court looked at it in a very narrow perspective. They looked at it as non-discrimination, which is in the Bill of Rights, really.
But you see, in law, you can use one principle against another. So when you're talking about non-discrimination, that particular statement is located in that particular clause, and that particular clause speaks for itself. And the word that the LGBT community went for there is the word sex. And that word sex there, the spirit of it, right from inception, has never been sex orientation. Because sex orientation and sex as gender are two different things.
Okay.
Yeah.
But bring that to Article 32 then.
Yeah.
Every person has the right to freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. Are we then not boxing this LGBTQ team into believing in what you believe in as the religious leaders?
Well, what we are telling them is that they are free to believe what they believe, but it is not a matter of law. They don't need to try and legalize what the law has explicitly spoken against. And if you want to know that there is a sinister agenda about it, is that already there is a progression of a case trying to dismantle the very center of it, which is the penal code, that criminalizes homosexuality. And it's already past the stage of High Court. It's now in the Court of Appeal. Now, with this particular legislation passed by the Supreme Court, and that particular interpretation then becomes very central to future arguments that would anchor into law all freedom that then would destroy the penal part of the penal code, which tries to introduce reasonable and acceptable norms and put them into law.
Okay. So this issue, it's about the interpretation, because we've talked about Article 27, Article 32. Let's bring in 36 now, which is where the Supreme Court really narrowed in. Every person has a right to freedom of association, which includes the right to form, join, or participate in the activities of an association of any kind.
And that's a dangerous precedence to use in terms of context. Because then are you going to, if today I showed up and say, I'm Al-Shabaab, it's a criminal offense. Then I want to associate. How is that different from this particular situation? Is it okay for every group to be given the right to associate? And that's the question we are asking as a church. Is that so? I mean, something has already been said in the penal code that it is wrong. So you're going to give them freedom of association, then you're going to progress it. And you know they're going to progress it. And you already have seen, if you chose to amalgamate the cases, as is usually the case in many situations, you amalgamate the cases so that you can look at them in context. In this case, they were very smart. They started one, waited, so now you cannot amalgamate. Okay? But the key question that we are asking as a church is, how do you give freedom of association to something that's not legal? Where do you stop? All
right. Dudley, what is your interpretation of these articles that I've just read, 27, 32, and 36? Especially 36, because this, I believe, is where the Supreme Court based their judgment on.
Okay, first when you get back to 27, I think I just slightly disagree with the Reverend on something. He says that sex in 27 means gender, male or female. But then the issue would be, where would you put the intersex? You have a child who's, if you look at them, they appear female, but they have a male organ. Or they have both. They are hermaphrodites. Those issues are there. I think that's why in the beginning I'd said that we need just to sober down, remove the emotions from it, and then just discuss it as an issue, as a social issue, and decide one way or another, which is a conversation the Supreme Court says it's not taking that up, it's leaving it for Kenyans to decide. On freedom of association, we've had a debate the whole day in a group of lawyers I am in. And the question I was asking was, there's these 18,000 people, a society of 18,000 people who represent murderers, they represent the corrupt, they represent rapists, they represent all manner of criminals. It's called the Law Society of Kenya. Because someone had asked if murderers wanted to get their own association, can they get registered? I mean, that's why I said it's a difficult question to answer. We have these people, they're called lawyers. It's the Law Society of Kenya. They represent all manner of people, right? I'm one of them. But then it's a delicate topic, Trevor. I don't have all the answers. Also just reading the judgment and trying to see the reactions. But what's for sure is that it has animated the Kenyan people beyond China Square. This one has trended on Twitter the whole day. China Square is because conditions of living are tough. This one is because Kenyans, are listening to the church and everything. So it's a delicate topic. It's a conversation that will be had over many days. It can't end in one day. But I think the Supreme Court judgment has done what Supreme Court judgments need to do. That is, create conversation, have people reflect on the status of the law, see if there's a need to change the law or not. The same day the court delivered this judgment, there's one that the church has not really focused on. It's about the rights of children. That's the Supreme Court's first case on the rights of children. Again, another family value. I think that one, the church also needs to look at it and to see what lessons are in it there. Okay.
Reverend, it's the concern that we're still talking about here. Are we really trying to legislate morality? Because you gave an example, but in all fairness, that's a bit of the extreme side. We're talking about things people do in their bedroom. Why should this be such a big conversation?
Trevor, that's the issue. The issue is, why should you bring what you do to your bedroom to court? We haven't asked you. We haven't asked you. We haven't said we're going to come and flush you out. This is not the country where people persecute LGBT people, but they keep throwing it in our face. And we as the church are saying, we haven't bothered you. Our gates are open to you to come and worship. And we want to also persuade you to leave completely that lifestyle because we consider it not right. And so it is not a matter of being extremist. It's a matter of being reasonable and saying you can never legislate some aspects of morality, but some aspects are already legislated based on our social fabric, our cultural fabric, our religious fabric, because we are a cocktail as a society, and there are certain norms we have decided to live by. A bit of history. In 2008, 2009, when this constitution was being lobbied and caucused, there were certain, proposals that were written that were openly in favor of LGBTQ. And the committee of experts went out and they asked the question to Kenyans, is this what you want? And overwhelmingly, Kenyans said no. Now, isn't it surprising that 15 years later, Kenyans are still resolved and resolute that we still don't want this lifestyle, and we don't even want a debate around it, because it is offensive and repugnant to our moral, social, religious, and cultural fabric. That's what the church is championing and saying, if you want to do your thing in your corner, we will not bother you. In fact, we'll invite you to come to church. But we are saying that this is not a national issue. It only becomes a national issue when it is pushed. And in our opinion, which can be a biased opinion, in our opinion, we feel it has foreign interests loaded onto it. And that can be labeled as a conspiracy theory, but we know why we make statements like those. I think that it is important for us to look at the wider aspect. There are aspects of morality that the Constitution has spoken into necessarily. There are aspects of morality that the Constitution will not speak into and therefore will not be legislated, because that will be infringing on people's private space.
All right. Danny, let me read part of the judgment here. Deputy Chief Justice Philomena Mwilu and Justice Smokin Wanjala and Justice Njoki Ndungu, their judgment was, it would be unconstitutional to limit the right to associate through denial of registration of an association purely based on sexual orientation of the applicants. Did they make a mistake?
Sometimes when you go to register an organization, you do not know the sexual orientation of the person trying to register. And then the issue here was, the NGO board said that the reason we are not registering is because we think that this would be used to promote activities which are illegal under the penal code. And so the court is saying, the Supreme Court itself says that no, this is still criminalized. It's still in our penal code. We are not touching it because we know there's a case at the Court of Appeal. But we think that you cannot refuse to register an organization purely on the basis of sexual orientation. I'd use the example of intersex. You have a child who appears female, but they have male organs. And then you say, because that's also part of those acronyms, there's intersex in there. And then you say that because of the person who's coming to register these is intersex, they're neither male nor female, we are not going to register. I think that would be unlawful. But I think what has offended the church the most is maybe the use of the terms sexual orientation as inclusive of the category sex. It forbids discrimination on the basis of sex, race, and the court interpreted sex to extend to sexual orientation.
Okay.
I think that's where the issue is.
Yeah. Trevor, let me speak into matters intersex. Intersex has no link with LGBTQ. Intersex is a biological medical condition. Yeah. And people who are intersex are known. They decide to flip one way or the other. So they are not part of this group. But LGBTQ people like to include them. Okay? Because for intersex people, they are a very special minority that are taken care of medically and biologically. But they are not part of LGBTQ. And so nobody has ever, and even in medical practice, nobody has ever discriminated against intersex people. But they get included against their wish. Okay. I would like to say, but I stand corrected. I'd like to say against their wish in LGBTQ.
I'm sure Denley has something to say about it.
I'm sure so.
I think that's the point Justice Ouko makes.
Yeah.
He says that these things are animated. We cannot, fully resolve them in court. He says that intersex do not want to be included in that community. So that's another thing the court leaves aside. He says we are not going into who forms part of what, because the intersex do not want to be, they're offended in being included there. And that's why he says that I think this is a debate that Kenyans should have out there, outside the court, and through Parliament, the elected legislators. Whatever they decide, well and good.
Okay. Yeah. I have to take a quick break. We'll be back with more in just a bit.
Yeah. Just before you take the break, I think the Supreme Court erred.
They did?
Yes.
Okay. Let's take that quick break and see what you're saying as well at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. I'll come back with your views in just a bit. All right? See you shortly.